So I'm feeling a little bit down right now. Not about the guitar project. Guitar project is coming along nicely. You guys are all joining me on it, and that's awesome. But I had a comment on the last video from Mr. Arizona Ed about a 50-year-old man who's really enjoying the videos, and I kind of thought, what are my demographics? So I looked them up, and my largest age group demographics was the 55 to 65-year-old age group. That was 32%. And then I looked at the genders, and 98.6% of my demographics for my videos is male. And of all of those, geographically, 45% comes from the U.S. And I was thinking to myself, that's not at all what my target demographics was. I was looking for 30-something-year-old females from Belarus. And I totally missed the mark on this. So I'm going to have to put some thought into what I'm showing here and kind of correct that. We are continuing on the Strat project I call Belle, B-E-L-L-E. And we're going to be working on the back of the guitar this time. There's three things that I want to accomplish. The first thing I want to accomplish, and it really doesn't matter the order of these, but there's a reason why I'm going to do an order a very specific way here. But we want to route out the tremolo cavity, not in the tradition of official Stratocasters, but just because I can, because this is a custom built project. I am going to do a neck relief area here just to make it a little bit more comfortable when folks are playing the upper frets. And then we're going to do the belly cut. I am going to start off with this template right here. This template is going to accomplish two things. It's going to accomplish the template for my routing of the tremolo cavity, and it's going to provide me the point to mark for when we're going to do the tummy cut. I'm a fan of the acrylic templates. I think they just hold up better over time, and so that's what I like to use whenever possible. Okay, so here's the tricky part. We've got to get this template in exactly the right spot before the tape fully takes hold. And that can be a little bit tricky thing to do because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the reference of my center line and where the tremolo cavity was done from the front to the back. That becomes my transferred reference line. I'm just going to use a couple sticks to keep the bottom from attaching just yet. And I'm going to try to get the front lined up with the center line and visually line this up the best I can. There's a slight ability to shift the template because that double stick tape does have a little bit ability to shift once we lay it down, but not much. So I want it to be as perfect as I possibly can at this point. Once we get that where we think it lines up pretty good, I'll pull out these guys and let that gently drop down and double check my alignments. And once we get it where we really like how flush it is inside the front and side portions of this other template, then I'm going to press it down pretty good to hold that in place. So now that we have a little mechanical leverage on there, the likelihood of this template sliding or slipping at all is dramatically reduced. While I'm here, so that I don't forget after I get done routing, it's a good time to mark where my belly cut is going to be. Let's talk about router bits real quick. This is my absolute favorite router bit for these operations. Don't know how well you can see that. I'll try to zoom in on it. It's basically a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch solid carbide spiral bit with 3 bearings attached to it. Well, you can't buy it just like that. I actually buy this as a rabbiting bit. It was a Freud rabbiting bit that had like a 1/2 inch, 5/8 maybe. Actually, yeah, it had a 5/8 inch bearing attached to it to create a little rabbited cut. And basically buy all of these 1/2 inch bearings, and I stack as many as I need to on it. So it's really a really good bit. Now, the depth that we are going to do on the tremolo block area is going to need more than a 1/2 inch bit because the router will not reach that far. So you gotta really be careful about those things so you don't ruin your template. So what we're going to need is a 1 inch to get a little bit further down, and then a 1.5 inch for the last little tiny bit around there. We're going to take it all the way down to about an 1/8 inch short of the front. Here's what I did for the setup. I basically line myself over the wood, take the bit down till it touches the wood, and then I set my maximum level up to 18 millimeters from that point. So from this rod to that screw right down there is exactly 18 millimeters. So that is going to be my final depth. Now what I'd like to do before I just go ahead and get started with this is lower that bit to all the way down to that 18 millimeter deep setting and look just to make sure that that collet is not sticking out past the base, because that would mean I'm about to damage the template. And this looks pretty solid here. Okay, so we've got that part done. That's right at 18 millimeters all around that and the beginning of the shelf for the tremolo block. Now we're going to have to switch to a deeper bit in order to continue down. Now you can use a separate template to have just this area. What I'm going to do is use the same template, but I'm not going to go in this area. I'm going to start it in here and I'm going to work my way around. Now, because we're using this longer bit, it gets a little bit tricky because you have to start the router with it in the open area and then engage. If you engage with that router sitting and touching the wood, it's going to be a not so pleasant experience. Okay, so you really have to be careful. A complete template that had just that slot would be the safest way to go. I just didn't want the redundancy of templates, so that's why I'm going to do it this way and just try to be real careful. And we'll take this bit down as far as we can comfortably go, and then we'll use the last bit if needed to get the extra little depth we need to get down to around 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch left in the top from this back shelf area. Now what I figured out is that from the surface of the wood, the back surface of the wood, to the point I need to stop is approximately 40 millimeters. That might be a little bit shy, but I can adjust later, but approximately 40 millimeters. So I basically set this up to 40 millimeters and the collet came all the way out, which means I would have damaged my template. So I restricted myself to only 30 millimeters of travel from the back of the wood, where that would have been, all the way down to the bottom of the travel for this bit. And the last 10 millimeters I'm going to have to get out of the 1.5 inch bit. The tricky thing is I need to extend this bit far enough where the bearing is at least half exposed to ride on this edge as my starting point. So I can't just straight plunge down because I won't have a guide. So I can start there and then I can incrementally get deeper from that point, and the bearing will continue to ride around this surface and we'll be fine. We're almost 1.25 inches deep, a little bit less. So again, another 10 millimeters and we're going to be there, but I got to swap to the deeper bit now. I hope you all understand why I have to use multiple depth bits. It's all based upon the bearing. I can't go in here and just take off all 1.5 inches, 1 5/8 all in one pass. It's not going to be a pleasant experience. So you have to do it in stages. I try whenever I'm removing material to limit it to maybe 2 to 3 millimeters per pass. The harder the wood, the more you want to think about erring on the 2 millimeters at a pass time. You know, roughly 1/8 of an inch at 3 millimeters is okay in most materials. But if you go any more than that, the bit's going to struggle, it's going to overheat, it's going to start burning, you're going to ruin the bits. So it's better to take lighter passes, and it's a whole lot safer too. So that's what we're doing. But now you look at this 1.5 bit, and I figured out I do have the full 40 millimeters of travel I need without that collet extending past the base. So that bit is going to be good. But again, I've got to start it at a point where that bearing is partially exposed. That's going to be, the first pass is going to be taken off about 1/8 of an inch of material, of that 10 millimeters that I need to take off. So we'll just continue it down from that point, and it should go smoothly, but it's a long bit, so you have to be extra careful with that for sure. One thing I will mention, I have not found a better dust collection system than the Festool here. This is the OF 1400. You know, love them or hate them, you can see how effective it is right here. I've got no dust really. A little tiny bit in the bottom of the pocket, but that's about it. Now we're going to talk about the neck heel recess area on the back of the guitar. Again, it's not a Fender thing, but a lot of folks do it, and I find it makes it a lot more comfortable to play when you're playing the upper frets. The thing you have to watch out for is you can't just go as deep as you want. You have to leave a certain amount of meat on this heel area. And so the number that I've gone with is 5/8 of an inch. So 5/8 is about where you should shoot for. You can leave more meat there if you're concerned about the wood kind of bowing and a structural integrity issue, but I would not go any less than that. So I may just go a hair fatter than 5/8 there to leave me a little bit of extra room just in case I remove more in sanding and such like that. So that's one of the things I think about. The shape itself is really personal preference. I just drew something that seemed to flow with the lines from the lower horn into the lines of the upper horn, and that kind of created something where the neck plate would fit perfectly recessed in this area, and it would give me a little extra room for the hand when playing in that region right there. So I made a template of that shape, as you can see here, and allowed a little extra room for me to kind of go back and forth, but left as much of this acrylic as I could to support the base of the router. Now, the one thing that I like to do when I make my templates is I scribe the outside of the guitar shape and the center line right on there, and I can use those as references for alignment. In fact, in this particular case, I beefed up a 1/4 inch acrylic with a 1/2 inch piece of Baltic birch plywood that I cut out to the exact shape. You could use the router and the template for the body shape itself to cut that out, and that way I can have this perfectly matched and get an extra depth. So once I mount this, the bearing following bit that I use to route that out is going to be some sort of cove bit. Okay, so you could use a 1/2 inch cove, which is a 1/4 inch radius, is a nice one for that. But with this extra piece, it gives me room for the bearing to ride on the template and not take too deep of a pass, either on the first pass or for the total depth, since we want to leave 5/8 inch minimum of meat on that heel area. In my case, I'm going to be using a much larger bit, okay? And this one is not one that I always use. Sometimes I use that 1/2 inch cove bit, but this one is a bowl bit, and I'm going to use this. It should leave a much more flat bottom, and still allow me to follow the bearing guide all the way around without any restrictions. So I think it's probably going to be a pretty good solution for this. Now my biggest problem that I want to overcome is any flex that happens to the template, the acrylic itself. What I generally do for these acrylic templates that expand and extend out too far is I put a couple 3/8 inch holes and I use leveling feet. Okay, so they're adjustable, they can swivel, and then we can use those and some washers and nuts, and we can get those set to perfectly the right height out here, and that way I'll have perfect stability, so when my router base comes out this way there'll be no flex whatsoever. Now somebody commented recently how they like the organization of my shop and they'd like me to kind of talk about how I organize things. Well, let me tell you, one of the ways that I organize things is I have a place that everything is designed to go in, and it is always in that spot. The problem comes in is when I forget where that location is. In all honesty, the leveling feet that I normally use, I put somewhere very organized and very specific, and I searched for it an hour and could not find them anywhere. So I'm having to rebuild new leveling feet from parts that I had on hand. And so maybe I'm not the one to talk about shop organization at this point in time. So we'll leave that question or that shop tour for maybe a later date. All right, same deal as before. Template is double stick taped in place. I am going to use clamps to also hold that stable. So I've got that set. These feet that I was talking about, I've got those set up. Looks like this one needs to be adjusted down just a hair more. So we've got those set up correctly. Now the same thing for the router setup with this bit. The thickness of the heel is 30 millimeters. Okay, so I'm converting things over just because it's easier with this metric router. But based upon wanting to leave 5/8 of an inch at the minimum, that's approximately 16 millimeters from 29, that leaves me 13 millimeters that I could remove. I've set this router up to take off 12 millimeters to give myself just a little bit room for error there. And I've also set the router stop right now to a point where half of that bearing is riding on the acrylic. That gives me less than 1/8 of an inch for my first pass depth of cut, which is fine, and then I'll creep it down from there until I hit my stop on the router, in which case I will have a round-overed inner corner and a flat area all the way along the heel. And that's what I'm going to be shooting for. After I remove the template, then I can manually use files and sandpaper the same way that I did on the last video where we were doing the forearm contour rounding of that edge, and I'll do the exact same thing on the outside edge within this neck relief area. And it's about 11/16, so I'm about a 1/16 fatter than my bare minimum, and I'm feeling pretty good. That much that we're taking off is going to make a dramatic difference to the playability of the guitar, so that'll be real nice there. So the last thing we have to do for this video is this area. Since we already have the line drawn where we need, all we need to do is figure out the depth. And that depth, again, is personal preference, but here's what I'm going to do, is I've got about 1 3/4 here. So I'm going to take 3/4, maybe 7/8. If we go halfway through, it'll be 7/8. So I'm going to mark it as a do not exceed line of 7/8. And then that will kind of blend into these edges. So generally, I'll look for about the midpoint of that arc, and that's the point where I will measure my 7/8 of an inch Now the goal here is to blend those areas together. So where my template intersects the edges, I'm going to just simply draw a line. It doesn't have to be perfect, because as we're basically filing this or rasping this way or grinding this area away, or however that you're going to do it, you're going to end up making sure that it's perfectly flat and there's no ripples in the contour. So that will take care of any inconsistencies here. So I just want to get a rough guide that I can use to shoot for initially. And I'll stop a little bit short of this so I have room to feather everything in together. All right, just like the other parts of the guitar, when I want to do some hand shaping, I like rasps, and most of the time I'll use those, and depending upon the size of the job, indicates or dictates what size rasp that I'll use. And I've got razor rasps, I got the dragon files, and I'm going to use the coarse dragon file to get this one going. And I've got this set up so that you can see. Normally I will set this up on my table and I will hang it off the table so I have full range of motion with that. So that's the critical thing here. And I'll just start grinding away. You can certainly use hand planes if you've got a nice spoke shave with a convex sole on it. You can work that, and that's a nice way to kind of shave the wood away. But let's show a tool I've shown before, but it's one that I like because it adds a little bit of power to this process and it'll speed it up. And I still may finish off with my files to get it, nice and flat, but this is a big help to me. This is a carving tool called a Merlin 2. And it's kind of lightweight, and it's got these abrasive discs, different basically grits, I guess, of discs that you can use to kind of grind and carve wood. And I find it to be pretty nice and controllable. I'm probably ready to step up to something a little bit more powerful for quicker operation, but it's really good to learn with something less powerful when you're kind of carving, in order to just get the feel of what it's like to do that, so you don't take too much too quick and end up ruining your project. So we're going to do a little bit with this. I normally do this on my downdraft table, but I'm just going to keep it clamped here for now, so it might be a little dusty, but we'll just see how bad it is. It's producing a good amount of dust. Going to go ahead and get a mask. All right, next time I'm taking it to the downdraft table, even if I have to move the cameras. There's a lot of sawdust. All right, now that I got this contour down really right close to my lines all the way around, and I've got it as smooth as I could using a sweeping motion with that grinding tool, then I like to come back and use the rasps to just make sure that it's flat as I'm coming around. That's going to be key to get that flat. So I'll take off any extra amount that I need in order to ensure that it is flat. And it shouldn't be much, and then I'll blend in the edges where it goes in to the round over edge. I'll blend that in. And we'll work this for a little while. Alright, here's a close-up of our work. We still have sanding to do, but we've got that right where we want it. We still have to do some manually rounding of those edges and blending those together, but that won't take too long. And we've got the tremolo back cavity complete. So it's looking pretty good. We went through the whole process with you. We started off with using the Merlin 2, and once I got it down close to the lines, I used my files to make sure I was working perfectly flat. I checked that with a short ruler just to make sure that perpendicular to all these edges it was perfectly flat, the contour. I'm using my fingers again to feel that I don't have any humps or bumps or lumps within that range, so it feels pretty good to me. And then I did take a StewMac scraper and scrape that surface again to help ensure everything was flat, and so that's kind of a nice tool for that also. Now, one last thing that you may want to do when you're talking about the belly cut on that contour is actually install your Strat buttons and hang it on you. And then you can get a feel for if the placement is right, or if it's slightly small, or if it needs to be broadened a little bit. You'll feel it against your side if you're building this for you. For me, I'm going to go and hang this from the woman from Belarus and make sure that it's a perfect fit for her. And hopefully it'll be nice. Can't keep a straight face on that one. I'll have to look on my list to see what we need to do, but it almost looks like I'm at the point where some finish sanding might be in order, and then starting to get ready for the finishing, the dyeing and the finishing process. So it's coming down to the wire. So until the next Belle video, remember, no matter what you do, start with excellence.